friends. Welcome back to Not Again, the podcast that brings college-level analysis to preschool-level content. I'm one of your hosts, Rebecca.
I'm Alan.
And today we are discussing Disney Pixar's Brave. Now, in full disclosure, the person who claimed to be Alan just now was lying. Who are you?
How dare you?
Who are you and how did you get on my stream?
This? Well, I'm Elseworlds Alan. I'm basically exactly the same as Alan, but my only facial hair is a goatee.
Oh.
And it's really awful looking, but it shows that I'm the evil one.
Ah, it's the mirror universe.
No, I'm I'm Martyn, Martyn Bryson. And yeah, that's, I guess, what more do you need from me at the moment?
No, that's fine. You're Martyn and you are Scottish.
Yes, which is why this is why we picked this one. So that's going to be fun. Yeah.
Yeah, so what I decided to do was give Alan a break from recording for a couple weeks. And what we're going to talk about is Brave, not because Warren has watched it, thank goodness. I've actually tried to keep Brave out of his radar as much as possible because I hate that movie. But it seemed so appropriate when we were discussing having you on as our first ever guest to talk about Brave because you have a particularly unique perspective on it.
Well, I don't know about unique. I mean, Scotland's a small country, but it's not that small.
Sorry, I guess unique is the wrong word. But like unique in that I could not provide that perspective. I mean, I've certainly I have some thoughts, but I bet you can provide a perspective that I cannot. We both took notes for our listeners to know this. Normally, if this is your first episode, welcome. It's an interesting one to jump in on, but it's our usual format, more or less, just a different host.
I'd say it's a good choice. Personally.
Yeah. And what we normally do is I have the notes and I kind of surprise Alan with them, like, surprise attack. And then he kind of responds to them in real time. In this case, Martyn and I decided ahead of time that we would both take notes and kind of just compare notes as we go. We're also both big talkers, so this is going to be fun. Just know that we're very good friends. And so if we end up talking over one another, we're used to it.
In the spirit of the thing, I won't be consulting my notes too much. I still want it to feel kind of organic. I think that's still pretty cool. So I'm going to be mostly doing that. But whenever it's a particular talking point I want to bring up, I'll consult those notes. Yeah.
Sounds good. Yeah, and I've got mine open because that's my comfort zone. And full disclosure, I have labeled my notes page not Brave, but Bears with an exclamation point. Because as you'll see, dear listener, this movie should have been titled Bears. But then Disney did come out with a movie called Bears. Does that recall? Disney has a bear obsession.
They do have a bear thing. I think we'll get a little bit into that later because I do want to talk about Disney's weird bear thing.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
I keep looking for your levels on my recording and going, oh no, they're not showing up.
You're not used to recording across the distance.
I know. Before we begin on the movie, I just want to disclose that while I'm not an expert on what happened, I do know that there was some kind of kerfuffle or incident regarding the director of this movie. I don't know the details. She said that it was a split over creative differences, but that sounds like a euphemism that's been used a million times before.
Especially by Disney.
Yeah, exactly. And so she did actually leave, I think towards the very end of production. And that is so apparent when you watch this movie that they were doing, so much filler, and we'll get into it, but a lot of the critique that I have, and I think that you have as well, could be resolved if they had just not had these directorial issues. So I wanted to point that out. How do you feel about Emma Thompson's accent? Let's start there.
Okay, so I will say up front, right, I'm going to put all my cards on the table. I'm not particularly fond of Emma Thompson at the best of times. I find her acting kind of stilted. So her accent is not the worst that I've heard. It is, to my ears at least, very obviously fake. But it is not the worst that I've heard. It's not a complete sin against humanity, but it still irks me that they hired a famous English actor to play quite a significant role in this film, and I don't think that's something I'll ever really get over, because it happens a lot. It happens a lot in TV shows and in movies and in various other things like that, where when a character is in a way that's intentionally Scottish, if you kind of understand what I'm saying there, where the character is supposed to be Scottish in a way that's significant to who they are, they rarely actually cast Scottish actors.
Yep.
Scottish actors, oddly enough, tend to get roles playing Russians, which is weird.
Yeah, and we're gonna get into the thing that you pointed out to me about Scottish comic relief later. So put a pin in that too.
Yes.
The reason I ask is because we open with the introduction to this family, and honestly, I just don't care. They set up this bow and arrow thing that has no payoff. We'll get to that later too. And then bear. Just always bear. And then, but before the bear, we see the will-o'-the-wisps. Now, I don't know, when... Did you see this movie in theaters?
I did, actually.
With Heather Sinclair, my best friend and your partner?
Yeah. Yes, indeed. the mysterious Heather Sinclair.
Yes.
We were still going to see movies in theaters at that point. For those of you who don't know, they used to show movies in this large building called a movie theater, and you would buy tickets to go in, and you would eat popcorn while you were there, and it was a terrible experience, but everyone did it for some reason.
Popcorn.
But now, of course, those have been extinct for decades.
Yeah. But you can still see the old relics sometimes, the buildings gathering dust. Yeah. The popcorn
like
machine still
Roman
full
ruins.
of popcorn that they will definitely serve to you if they ever open again. Yeah, so we saw it in I saw it in theaters with my mom, and this was the shift because prior to this, I would have considered myself a Pixar fan. Now, take that with a grain of salt. I was a teenager, not the best taste in the world, but I liked Finding Nemo. The Incredibles was my favorite movie of all time, besides like Pirates of the Caribbean, because I was crushing on Orlando Bloom real hard. And so I was a Pixar fan. And then I saw it, and I was not impressed. And it was Pixar's first female protagonist, and this is what they did with it. It's just, it grates on me. So she sees these will-o'-the-wisps, and in the theater, which is why I brought this up, I'm like, well, those are evil. They're these little child ghosts that laugh and coo to you in child voices. And I was like, what? Why is she going toward, oh God, she's going to die, and the movie's going to be over in the first 5 minutes. And
that would have been a bold creative choice.
Yeah, it was an interesting one because they are evil, or at least not good spirits in lore, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the word lore is a bit vague, right? So, like a lot of things that come from kind of European folklore and often what I will very loosely call Celtic folklore, it's not very well understood, and it's often blending a lot of different things together into one. And I think the thing that really trips people up is that a lot of what we recognize now as countries, like nation states, didn't exist when these stories were popular. Like, they weren't a thing. So we tend to attribute them to specific countries in ways that don't make sense. But yeah, I mean, in Scotland, in Scottish folk history, there is, and in English and Irish and Welsh and various other parts of Europe, there is a belief in this little spirit, which we now kind of colloquially call the will-o'-the-wisp, which are known for leading people away through the woods, essentially to their doom. Like, they will be trapped somewhere and they'll be killed, or they will be kidnapped by the fairies, or they'll be taken away and for some other like nefarious purpose.
Or drowned in a swamp, I saw. Like drowned in a
drowned in a
swamp
is one.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's variations on the story, and of course it's changed over the centuries.
Yeah.
But they are almost always, at best, a dangerous neutral presence. They're rarely a specifically positive thing. So I did think that was a strange choice.
Yeah, and they're terrifying. And then, of course, her mother says, like, they'll lead you to your fate. And I'm not going to do the terrible Scottish accent that I do when I'm mocking this movie in private company. But my thought was, yeah, if your fate is to die, then yes, they'll lead you to that. I didn't understand at all why these were considered good things, but they are, and they're just plot conveniences as well. They're literally like, hey, go over here because we need the plot to happen over here. Like, that's how the movie uses them.
They're kind of strange to me because the way that they work, they almost look like those little motion activated lamps they sometimes get on the sides of pathways.
Yeah.
Like, they're not leading her anywhere on their own. They're just kind of standing in a line and turning themselves on as she goes along, which is a very weird visual.
Oh yeah, it's I thought
that was very strange.
Parasite.
Yeah.
You know, somebody's just bashing their head against the wall and making the little lights turn on. She thinks that they're magical and they're not. Spoiler alerts for Parasite. Go watch Parasite after you listen to this, of course. It's a good movie.
It's fantastic. It's not a kid's movie.
No, it's not a kid's movie. Oh, by the way, don't curse, Martyn.
Oh, yes, I remember. Yeah, I remember. It's a good thing you reminded me because I may have done it by accident.
And there are going to be some close calls. I wrote this soundtrack, and that's about that. I did ask this of you before, and I honestly don't remember the answer because my memory is terrible. But did Scotland have princesses?
Yes, there was a tradition of royalty in Scotland, right up until what we call the Union of the Crowns, which was a historical event where the kingdoms of Scotland and England combined into one under the auspices of the English royal family.
Okay.
So there was some tradition of kings and princesses back then. Pixar's grasp on it is a little questionable.
That's yeah. It feels,
I think that's fair to
weird.
say.
For sure. And by the way, thank you for bringing a historical perspective to this podcast. It sorely lacks history usually. I'm not trying to speak out of ignorance. I just literally, well, I guess I am ignorant, but like not the bad kind of ignorant. It's just that I don't have the knowledge kind of ignorant. I'm very bad at history and factual stuff and whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's totally fine. Like, I know some history about certain specific things, so it's I'm not exactly gonna show off there.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, you're still better than I am. As I said in one of my Potato Lady reviews, your average garden slug knows more about history than I do. Not that I'm calling you an average garden slug, but I'm saying you're doing great. Then we have the setup for what I would call an action princess movie that does not happen. And this is, I think, spurred by the directorial issues that they had, because they're setting up that she's going to ride through the wilderness and shoot a bow and arrow and be free and actiony and feminist. And then they're just like, no, we're not doing that.
Yeah. It shows, like, it really shows that this film was rewritten at the last minute. I feel feels very obvious.
Very pieced together.
Yeah. You
sure.
can see the bones of an earlier story in there.
Yes.
And they've just kind of awkwardly draped
Bears.
another story over the top of it.
Yes.
And pretended it was intentional.
Yeah, we're going to have a very long "What Have We Learned" segment. I hope you're prepared, because there's going to be a "What Have We Learned" segment.
For sure.
For sure.
Yeah. I just looked it up, by the way. The original director was called Brenda Chapman.
Mm-hmm.
And she was fired and replaced.
Oh, not fired. Creatively different.
Yeah, well, that's what you have to say. That has changed in the years since. She has become more critical of Disney in the interim.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So, yeah, it was not a good scene for them. And this happens occasionally with Disney, right? This is a thing where Frozen had this. The Frozen sequels suffered from this a lot, and I won't get too deep into it because that's not really the soft topic of today, but I just want to quickly touch on this problem. It comes up in other places. The Frozen 2, for me, had a lot of the same problems that Brave did.
Yes.
And it felt like 3 different films kind of awkwardly smashed together.
Yes.
In a way that just did not work for me at all. And part of the problem there, and I feel like it's much more obvious in Brave, but it is really across both films, is that they have a clear directorial vision to begin with that becomes increasingly compromised as time goes on by the addition of another director, other writers. And in the case of Brave, the shift was more extreme, where the director was creatively different.
Yes, creatively. It's a verb now.
There. She was creatively different out of her job, and
I'm going to let you finish.
Another director.
But we should do a bonus episode for my Patreon, or both of our Patreons. You have one too. We'll get to it later, where we just do like a commentary track for Frozen 2.
Oh, that would be fun.
Would that be fun or what? Fun. I want to do that with you.
Yeah, that'd be.
I wish Heather would join us, but Heather Sinclair does not, be on things.
Heather Sinclair's a shy person.
Yes, and I respect that.
Can't have you discovering her deep secrets.
Exactly. So anyway, sorry, you were saying directorial debut, but guys, look out for that. Look out for that commentary track.
And this again, it feels much more pronounced with Brave, and I think that's reflected in the extreme nature of the differences that were in place, to the point where, as I said, where she was creatively different out of her job, replaced by another director. After filming was already well into the process, I say filming, it's not really filming, but
production, whatever you want to call it. People get it.
Yeah, production. After already well into production. So they had to use the assets they had to use what they were able to work with, they had to use the room in the story that hadn't already been done.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, animation is not something you can just go reshoot. Like, with human actors, it would still be a mess, like with live action, I mean. But you could like rework scenes and call them back and say, let's just reshoot this and reset up the set or whatever. But with animation, it takes years to do a movie, and that's when everything runs smoothly.
I mean, even live action movies, like reshooting looks messy. But,
yes.
I mean, it seems more pronounced with CG films, and I don't know enough about the process. I'm not a filmmaker, but if I had to guess what what I would kind of put out there, and if someone please correct me if I'm wrong about this, is that they make a lot of the visual assets early in the process. And those are set in stone before the film is really started in a recognizable way, is really pieced together. So when you have a situation like this where the director was replaced at the last minute and they really want to insert a new story in there, you have to use what you've got. You can't add a bunch of new CG assets in there because that would take way too much time and money, and they're just not willing to commit to that at that point in the process. So they really want then is to just work with what they have and try and fit it around what's already there.
Yeah.
And I think if that is true, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong there, that would explain a lot
Martyn
about this film.
Don't tweet at me. I don't want to hear if Martyn's wrong. If they're wrong, tweet at is this Martyn. But yeah.
It's Martyn with a Y, so don't get it wrong.
Oh yeah, it's Martyn with a Y.
Yeah, sorry, I'm rambling on a little bit, but it would explain a lot about what's wrong here, and I think we'll get a little bit more into the details, but the basic plot feels extremely disjointed, and it is very clear from the start.
Yeah, whatever they did do, it feels disjointed, and it feels cut together, and it's weird.
I think it's most obvious at about the 30-minute mark or so. I can't remember the exact timestamp, maybe you have a note on this, but the point where basically as soon as the bear plot kicks in.
Yep, I made a note of that. So we're going to, we have a couple of pins at our pin board now, but let's put a pin in that too, because I did. We are of a very similar mindset here. Before we get there though, I had to look up haggis because I know that no, seriously, like they used every cliche in the book. They made sure to, and we'll talk about this later because I have stuff about like the kind of dilemma they ran into where they're used to using Scottish characters as comic relief, but also they're making a film about Scotland and they clearly didn't know how to reconcile those two things. But before we get there, they definitely needed to hit every cliche. Haggis is a cliche Scottish food, and it does seem fairly old in its origins, but what I didn't like about it was that nobody would say, stop playing with your hamburger. They would say, stop playing with your food. The fact that they made her say haggis is what bothered me. You need to know it's haggis because this is Scotland, right?
And you can't necessarily tell just by looking at it because on the surface, haggis doesn't really look like anything special. It just looks like a little bag of food.
Yeah, but like God forbid that like we don't know they're eating haggis.
Yeah, they really wanted to make sure you knew it was haggis because that is, quote, funny.
Yes, haggis. It's so funny that Scottish people eat food. Like, well,
again, haggis is a weird food. Like, I'll admit that. I don't really like it, but a lot of people do like it, and it is a national dish, so it's like a thing. It's like, okay,
yeah, but like tongue sandwiches are a weird food, and they're a delicacy in a Jewish deli. I used to eat tongue sandwiches all the time before I grew up and started thinking about what I was putting in my mouth and couldn't anymore. So to say that this is weird and we should laugh at it is still insensitive because food is weird sometimes. And then this one I'm puzzled over. The Queen announces that the other clans, we'll get to them, have, quote, accepted the invitation, but it appears to be an invitation to marry Merida. So, like, what was the invitation exactly? Like, come here and find out who's going to marry my daughter?
They set it up like it's supposed to be basically a debutante ball, where the idea is they get her out there in front of everyone and they all kind of compete to be the one who wins her heart. They say, oh, look at this beautiful young girl. She's now of age. You can put your finest sons out there.
Oh, God.
It's kind of it's something you see a lot in kind of historical fantasy.
Yeah.
Not so much recently, but certainly like in more like the 90s and the 80s, it came up a lot in historical fantasy films and shows and such.
I just wonder at the word of invitation, though. It's not like it's.
It is, yeah.
I don't think they would accept the invitation to go and have this young woman paraded in front of them. They would just like be like setting the date for something preordained.
It is supposed to be kind of a summit, right?
Yeah.
But they kind of talk about it like it's a party.
Yeah. They act like it's a party that they're accepting an invitation to, but it's also a summit to like, you know, apparently put some bad blood to rest among the clans, but it's also where they're going to parade Merida around and make them compete to marry her. And it's apparently also where they're going to sing about bears, but we'll get to that too.
So what they're doing here, and I think this is something that it didn't occur to me last time watching it, but when I rewatched one of the shorts related to it, which I'll talk about in a minute.
I didn't know there were shorts related to it. Okay.
There's one. There's one. It's called The Legend of Mordu.
Ugh.
And
I have seen that, I think, because of Heather.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, go on.
Okay, yeah. Anyway, we're not going to get into that. That's besides the point. But what they're trying to do here is draw up a reflection of that story, right? Because they get a little bit later into the story of like what passes for the villain of this movie, which is a bear called Mordu, like an enormous bear called Mordu, who it is revealed is the kind of cursed son of an ancient king, right?
Yep.
Who was turned into a bear because of his like cruel ambition, or who was turned into a bear and then never got better because of his cruel ambition. The bear was intended,
right? Well, sort of.
What they're trying to do here, I think, is parallel that story with the story of these four clans, right? So they had the guy from the story of Legend of Mordu had four. There was four. There was him and three brothers, and they all warred over this kingdom, and he won. Crushed them all, but his own armies abandoned him and his kingdom collapsed.
Right. They're supposed to be like a four pillars sort of thing, you know, holding up the ceiling and all that.
Yeah, so what they're trying to do is set up a parallel there between these four clans and the four kingdoms in the past, but they never characterize these clans any way beyond their specific kind of comic relief they're supposed to be.
Yep.
They have no character beyond that at all.
And they're barbaric, which, like... You can probably speak to this better than I can, but this idea of classifying Scottish people as the people of the earth or the less civilized people, where English people are the civilized ones, they go hard into that with this movie.
They really do, yeah. It's a pretty common stereotype that Scottish people can be, you know, like rough. Aggressive, violent. Rough is a good way, but maybe violent's a little too far. But I think rough is certainly common. That they drink a lot, that they're loud and pushy and aggressive. I will share this story on the pod since I've talked about it a bunch of times before. I used to live in Edinburgh, and there was a cafe near where I lived. And when Heather and I were sitting at one of the outside tables of the cafe, this is long before COVID. We were sitting there, and there was an English couple on the table next to us who were conspiratorially whispering to each other, and we heard them say, "You know, they eat the whole animal up here."
I remember this story.
And that really, for me, like, it's not that remarkable. It's the kind of weird, petty prejudice you hear a lot, but it is something that just encapsulates for me that attitude so perfectly, where they treat people who are very geographically and culturally close to them as if they're these weird, mysterious outsiders.
Yes.
And it is very weirdly colonial. It's very strange. It doesn't make much sense to me from like a socio-cultural perspective. I don't understand it. But it is something that comes up a lot in movies too. And this is what you're seeing here, is that they are, for want of a better term, and this is a really like troubling term, but that's essentially what they're leading into, is savages.
Right. And that's not, it's not an okay term, and we are both acknowledging that. It's just like, it's the cliche they're going for.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Well, to be quite frank, it's a racist idea.
Yeah.
And this is not to say that, of course, Scots are being treated as with any kind of racial prejudice. That's not what I'm getting at. It is the particular cultural idea behind savages and savage cultures that they're leaning into here for the purposes of comedy.
Right.
This is
awful.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's pretty bad.
This movie throws into sharp relief the fact that while not all bigotry is equal, right? Because I wouldn't compare the plight of Scottish people to, say, African Americans. Bigotry takes on a lot of different forms. And I would never have thought about Scottish people facing this kind of, prejudice.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated thing, and obviously there are degrees of intensity and degrees of form, and again, just to be very clear, that I'm not comparing those things at all.
Oh no, I wasn't trying to imply.
But
yes.
yeah, I know.
We should be clear about that.
I just want to make like extra sure that no one misunderstands what I'm getting at here. Yeah. But there is this particular stereotype that comes up like a lot.
Yes.
It seems to override.
And they go hard into it here.
Think of it really does. It really dehumanizes most of the characters in this movie very powerfully.
Yep.
I think there are two characters in the entire thing which don't exist exclusively for comedy. And there is a large cast, a cast of maybe 100 or so, I'd say maybe 20 or so named characters who regularly get lines, and only two of them can really be described as people.
And I'm going to get into that a little bit, but before I do, I have a quick question, which is, Merida never knew that her society and culture does the arranged marriage thing? She seems completely surprised that she's going to be part of an arranged marriage.
Did they say what age she is? I don't remember.
You know what? I also, I was calling her 15, and I was like, I should have paid attention because it was her birthday. I'm pretty sure that was what she was talking about with I get to ride my horse today and shoot my bow and arrow. And let's say 15 or 16.
It's supposed to be that she's coming of age, right? She's now an adult, so she can be married. That's what they're getting at. So whatever age that looks like to them.
Yes, which is still apparently underage to me. Like she looks. So one thing that this movie did badly was it had to create, albeit a historically inaccurate old movie, still an old movie, but contend with modern sensibilities of feminism and age of consent and everything. And it just failed on every level at doing that.
And it fails because it completely lacks focus. I'm sorry, do we describe the plot of the film? Do we want to go into that? Is that something we want to do just very briefly? Or do you not want to
yeah,
bother?
I guess. And also, I should explain a couple things. Number one, my best friend is a very private person. My best friend is married to Martyn. I have been saying my best friend a lot on this show, and it got a little old. So I came up with a pseudonym, and you get bonus points if you can figure out the origins of that pseudonym. So her name is not Heather, but I will forever be referring to her as Heather or Heather Sinclair. Number two.
I kind of like it because Heather sounds Scottish. I like it.
Yeah, that works. Yeah. Number two, this is a movie where ostensibly a young woman finds out that she's going to be married off to another clan, prince, whatever, and doesn't want to be. But it's also a lot about how she accidentally turns her mother into a bear and then bear shenanigans ensue. And that's all you really need to know if you haven't seen Brave. And number three, I realized that since we're coming up on the end of our first episode, a great breaking off point will be coming up soon because the movie creates its own when it, as you said earlier, kind of just like jumps off into movie number two's plot. So we will get there very soon and that'll be good. So yeah, that's fine. You don't have to talk about the plot more than that. I try not to be, because there are like kind of like a lot of like movie plot summary podcasts out there, and I don't want to be that. So I tend to just like go with it and hope that people can follow along. But that's probably not the best strategy.
No, I think it works in your case because more or less everyone's already familiar with Disney stuff anyway. So I don't think we need to bother with that. I was just curious if you wanted to cover it.
No, we did enough. So given that she is coming of age and she exists in this land, in this culture as a princess, it just feels completely unreal to me that she would never have heard or found out that she is part of a culture that does arranged marriages. Why was she surprised by this? Yeah. And they decided to just like tell her over the dinner table.
It's weird. Like, I don't know if we're supposed to read it as it's not that she didn't know about it, it's that she hoped she could avoid it. But the way that she responds implies that she's surprised by the existence of it.
Completely surprised.
And I think this is a term you used. I think you and Heather both use it, called action princess no one marry.
Oh, yeah.
And that describes this movie to a T.
Well, maybe I'll link to... you know what? I think I have a lot of Patreon content for this episode, but that was from my blog post about Brave when I first saw it. I had a quick line in there saying that the plot could be summed up as action princess no want marry, and then I think Heather referenced it at some point, and I was like, "That's hilarious! Who said that? Where did you get that from?"
So good.
And she was like,
"A good name for that trope."
So yeah, I'm flattered that she references it because I apparently that fell out of my brain and then I forgot it fell out of my brain. So maybe I'll link that blog post. It is in public, not public domain, but it is a public blog. So Patreon wouldn't make sense, but I'll link it at some point when we release this episode, maybe from my personal Twitter. But yeah, so she seems very surprised by the arranged marriage. And then she starts yelling at her mom about how she wants her freedom. And my first thought was like, did they think that every Scottish movie has to be about a Scottish person wanting their freedom? It just feels so cliche for her to yell about her freedom. And I say Scottish movie, by the way, very lightly when very referencing loosely, Braveheart.
Yeah. So, I mean, for those who don't know, like... I don't know who wouldn't at this point, but like for those who don't know, like the cry of freedom it was made famous, I guess you could say, by the movie Braveheart, Mel Gibson film. Also a problem of someone who is not Scottish and does not know Scottish culture, kind of doing their own thing with it.
Yep.
And they don't use that phrasing in Brave, I suspect because they didn't want people to draw intentional parallels, but the themes are all there. Like the idea behind Merida is that she wants to avoid being, I guess, trapped in a marriage or political system that she wants no part in, and is deciding to defy convention. And
well, this is where we get the kind of diverging plot lines, because on the one hand we have her wanting to be like kind of wild and free and untethered and riding her horse and whatever. And on the other hand, we also have her mom telling her she needs to be ladylike and implying that she is not, and that she needs to quest to show her mother that she doesn't have to be a lady or something. And neither of those work.
Well, there we have the first plot kind of presenting its thesis statement, right? So we have Merida, who is not your ladylike princess. She is wild and carefree, and she loves action and being out there in the wild.
And she walks all
being
clompy.
a part of the world. Yeah. She doesn't want to be in a really... They show her a scene with her in this very tight dress that really restricts her breathing, and she can't walk properly. And she has this headdress over her hair, and it's meant to make her look very kind of wrapped up and ensorcelled. And it's meant to be a visual...
a symbolic thing about how she feels in her life.
A symbolic thing where she is at her most imprisoned here. Again, imprisoned is not the right word, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
She's at her most kind of enclosed and trapped. And when she leaves the castle after that scene, the dress tears and the headdress comes right off and her hair's flying free and we have her visual. This is who she is. She is this free person who really wants to be a part of the world. She doesn't want to be hidden away from it. That is the thesis statement of film number 1.
And it was advertised in the trailer. If I recall, like they were really playing it hard with like that scene where she like climbs up a waterfall, and that is nothing.
Which by the way, it's like 20 seconds long and it's at the very beginning and never comes up again.
Yeah, it's absolutely nothing. They used all of that for the trailer, and then like
they did.
That's over, as we're about to find out in the first 30 minutes, and we will get there very soon. But first, and by the way, I want to say, in case you didn't notice, she does actively very much say, not the Braveheart line, but she says, "I want my freedom," or something like that. Like she uses the word freedom.
I want my freedom. That's what she says.
I think that's what she said. And so it's there. But yeah, so then the stereotypes arrive, and we have one who is a Pict, and I'm going to try to like hit that T hard because if anyone's like me, they definitely haven't heard of the Picts or know a lot about them. But I believe you said because of that blue war paint. That's the Picts, is it like a totally different time period or different people, or what is that?
So yeah, the Picts were a distinct people. They were a distinct group. They're often described in a few different ways. There's actually not a whole ton known about them, but they were distinct from the Scots and a few other of the kind of ethnic groups of Scotland.
And so, would they be considered Scottish, or
they're Scottish in the sense that they lived in what we now call Scotland.
Okay.
Scotland is named for a different group called the Scots, which should be fairly, I think, obvious why that is.
I think I can connect those dots.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't want to go too much into the history. It's quite boring.
It's fine. It's it seems
it's
incongruous to see the Picts represented there. Is it?
Especially because they are treated as fundamentally the same.
Yes.
As the Gaelic kingdoms, so the two main kind of political forces at the time I assume this is supposed to be set.
And they have to assume because
Scotland,
the history is all over the place in this movie, just clarifying that.
Yeah, kind of medieval Scotland, essentially. That's a very, very vague and sort of blindly guessing in the dark a little bit.
Yeah.
Because they are very non-specific about it, but which I think was on purpose. But the two main forces were the Gaelic kingdom, called, and forgive my mispronunciation here because my Gaelic is not a language I speak, Dal Riata, which politically combined with the Pictish kingdoms to form the kingdom of Alba, which is what we now call Scotland.
Okay.
So they were distinct groups of people, distinct ethnic groups. They spoke different languages. They had very distinct cultures. And over time, over like wars and various political machinations, they formed a single kingdom, which is Alba. Alba is now is the word for Scotland in Gaelic as well. So you may have heard that before.
Oh, I see. All right.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, so that was just, so the blue war paint, and that's Craig Ferguson's character, and I remembered you pointing that out, which is why I wanted to ask you about it, and I appreciate you understanding that history can be boring sometimes, but I think that people can also find, I find the cultural aspect really interesting. As you know, I love learning about that stuff, so I hope people weren't too bored. I found it nice. So that's that, and then they arrive to bagpipe music. And this one I do know, by the way. I can tell you that bagpipes are associated with Scotland, but they are not the only country that has created such an instrument as a bag of air with the pipes attached. They have occurred in history and in different countries, like all over. And so it's weird that it's associated specifically with Scotland. Similarly, kilts. Now, this one I think I do know is that kilts are associated with the Scottish a little bit wrongly or something like that. Like the Queen had something to do with it.
Yeah. So the kilts as we know them now, like what people think of when I think of a kilt, did not exist until about the 18th century.
Okay.
They were created after the Union of the Crowns, so which was in 1603. I think, again, history, not my strong suit, so please forgive me if I get some details wrong. But I think kilts were first introduced in the 17th or 18th century because, for political reasons, a lot of the traditional clan wear was banned. The idea was to prevent people from forming political groups around clans and rebelling, because this was immediately at the tail end of a very bloody rebellion, the Jacobite Rebellion, which if anyone's seen Outlander, God forbid, you'll be familiar with. Oh, yeah, so they banned all traditional clan wear. Is
Outlander a bad? You talking about that show that is all about that woman who like falls back in time to Scotland or whatever?
That's the one.
Okay.
That's the one, yep.
All right. Is it a problematic show then?
In ways I won't get into because it's not family friendly.
Oh, okay.
But it is, yeah, it has troubles.
Okay.
That show, I will say.
So kilts. Kilts.
Apologies to any fans of Outlander there.
Yes. So there's the Jacobite Rebellion. And by the way, I have to say it's interesting, not to cut you off, but similar techniques were used to keep the Jews in line, the Jewish people in line. I get to say Jews because I'm a Jew, throughout history as well. Usually, though, with religion rather than like the opposite kind of happened during the Holocaust, where they were made to wear something to identify themselves as a group with the Stars of David on their clothes, but also just kind of like forbidding them from practicing Judaism as a form of control, as well has happened in history.
Yeah, and it's often a very political move, the idea that it's harder for people to identify with a symbol if no one is allowed to be seen wearing it in public, and it discourages people from feeling like it's okay to be that way. It's quite common, and throughout history, and we see an example of that there. So kilts were created as a compromise because they were a unified style of dress which Scottish soldiers in the new British military could wear. Okay. And so a lot of what we now associate with Scottish clans and Scottish imagery was fabricated. It didn't really exist in the way that we imagine it.
So would they have been wearing it in this time period, like a kilt?
Definitely not.
Definitely not.
They would have been wearing things that were similar. Some of the characters are wearing plaids, which what they would have been wearing, as well as like cotton shirts and various other things.
Oh, so people need to distinguish between kilts and plaids.
Yes.
Okay.
So the plaid is a single piece of cloth which covers the entire body. So it goes over the shoulder.
Over the
waist,
shoulder one.
And it's a single piece. Yep. And it's held together by a single large brooch.
Yep.
That is much closer to what would have been worn by a lot of people at the time. Again, not everyone. There was variations, but that
kilts
is kind
themselves.
When you think of iconic Highland Scottish wear, the plaid is kind of where your mind should be. The kilt was a compromise, and it was created in about, as I say, much, much later for unrelated political reasons. So kilts would not have existed at this time period, and they would not, but you can't...
But the movie uses them kind of interchangeably.
American movies, and not just American movies, like really any popular film can't portray Scottish history without showing a kilt.
Yep, because how else would we know they're Scottish?
Well, yeah, and they always do the same joke, this always the same one, where... The joke is that you don't wear underwear under your kilt. I
had that written down.
Which is so bizarre to me.
They hit every cliche. And this actually transitions, so we're running a little long, but I want to get this in the end of this episode. This transitions us really nicely into the idea of using Scottish people as comic relief. Because, as I said, they're used to using Scottish people as comic relief, but this is a movie about Scotland. And so what they did is they made a movie making a mockery of Scotland because they didn't know what else to do. And so they hit every cliche. And in fact, I want to talk the most about two things, which is one, the list that came to my mind. It's not in no way a comprehensive list of Scottish comic relief that we see in our American media at the very least. And the other being that we are meant to explicitly laugh at their accents. And so
there are a couple of instances, especially where that's really clear.
Yeah, and I don't know the names of any of the characters, by the way. It hurt to watch this movie twice. So I have to say there is a rather large lad who talks about caber tossing, and we are meant to laugh at the fact that he... So the subtitle, by the way, this is later when he speaks again towards the end of the movie, but I assume that the subtitle would be the same in the beginning as well. The subtitle was "Speaks Unintelligibly."
Here's the thing about that, right?
Yes.
They clearly did some research because I understood every word that character said.
Yes.
He's speaking what's called Doric, which is a Scots dialect from Aberdeen or Aberdeenshire.
Yeah.
And it can be impenetrable for people who have not heard it before. I used to live in Aberdeen, so I learned. Mm-hmm. But it can be pretty impenetrable. But it's not in itself funny. Like, it is just a Scottish accent. It's just one variety of Scottish dialect and accent. And the joke is that the fact that he speaks it at all is bizarre. And it's really strange because he is the son of one of the chieftains, and his own father repeatedly jokes about not understanding what he's saying.
Yep.
How does... It cannot be the joke that this person has a funny voice in and of itself. That's not a joke. That's
and,
just
I mean,
weird
if you think
bullying.
about it, we just, like, human beings, or possibly just Americans, I'm not sure, but, like, making fun of accents as just the joke is the accent happens with American South as well. Just the Southern accent. Yeah. Like, it's funny that they talk in this dialect specifically. No, it's not. Why are you making fun of the way people articulate? You know, like, why are we making this a laughing stock? And so we are literally saying the nature of somebody speaking in a Scottish dialect is laughable and unintelligible. And that is a horrible thing to assert.
It's a common one, too. Like, it's a dialect associated with one of the country's major cities. Like, as I said before, Scotland's not a big place.
Yeah.
It has... even its largest city would be dwarfed by the smallest American major city.
I guess near to me would be Minneapolis.
A not insignificant number of the population speak Doric, and it is very strange that they thought it was acceptable to just make the fact that they do that the joke, and it still bothers me in a way I wasn't really prepared for. I think when I went in to watch it the first time, I expected some of that because that's just standard practice.
No, it's really enraging.
But I didn't. It really bothered me to an extent I wasn't expecting the first time that I saw it.
Yeah, sure. And I'll admit I can't. I can now understand what he says with the caber toss because you told me what he says, and I hear it now perfectly. Mm-hmm. And it's actually kind of interesting to me that I ever couldn't understand what he said, but later on he talks and I couldn't understand, and I will admit that. But, like, there are lots of people who speak and I can't understand them, and I don't think that's funny. I don't think they deserve to be mocked for, you know what I mean? Like, you know, there's different languages, there's different dialects, sometimes there's, you know, lost in translation, all that stuff. It's not a joke, but we have to move on. So you were actually the person who pointed, no, it's fine. It's just my job on the podcast to keep us, quote, on time. You are the person who pointed out to me that Scottish people are used very commonly as comic relief, especially in American cinema and like TV shows. And so I have a brief list here to kind of prove it, I guess. I like coming prepared. Oh, yeah. And then we're going to talk about kind of just the shift into movie number 2. But yeah, so I have on my list a character named Roddy McStew from a show that I still love called Freakazoid. It's one of Steven Spielberg's like Tiny Toon Adventures, sort of like that era Animaniacs cartoons. Roddy McStew walks around in a kilt, not a plaid, because I think that it doesn't go over the shoulder, and played by Craig Ferguson according to IMDb, which I did not know when I looked it up. Seems to be the go-to for a lot of these roles, he is a comedic go-to. And speaking of, he plays Gobbert in How to Train Your Dragon, which is interesting because that movie does have Scottish people at the forefront, like Gerard Butler, who are not the comic relief, but they still made sure to include Craig Ferguson as that kind of comic relief. So I kind of include it. It's not the worst. And by the way, when How to Train Your Dragon, which misappropriated Viking culture to Scottish people, is still doing Scotland and Scottish better than your movie about Scotland, you have a problem.
Yeah, that was weird to me. I've only seen the first How to Train Your Dragon film, and it was quite a long time ago, so I'm a bit behind on this. But I did think it was weird to me. They cast Scottish actors in these roles, and I thought they were supposed to be Norse.
Yep. Well, so a lot of people point that out, and I think that they just thought that, and again, here we are, I think they thought that Norse accents are, quote, funny, and so they couldn't do that. It's not that there isn't like something there. Like, there is a history there between the Vikings in Scotland. It's quite an extensive history. But they gave many of the characters Norse names. Yep. So I did think it was a little strange, yeah. But at the same time, okay, now we're getting into How to Train Your Dragon. But at the very beginning, Hiccup narrates that his home has a charming view of the sunsets, plural. So they establish that they're also not they're in an alternate history/world. Anyway, so that's Rodney McStew and Gobbert, and then we have groundskeeper Willie, also in a kilt usually, right? Also with that cliche, not wearing underwear. Pocahontas, Disney's Pocahontas, which was problematic in 9,000 ways, but they do have, oh my goodness, I forgot his name. Very famous Scottish actor. He plays the dad in Brave.
Oh, Billy Connolly.
Billy Connolly. Oh, I couldn't. Oh my goodness. See, I love him from Muppet Treasure Island, so I couldn't believe I forgot. But yeah, they have Billy Connolly playing alongside a British gentleman, the kind of comic relief settlers, but still there. And then Scotty in the new Star Trek franchise, played by Simon Pegg, they definitely use him as kind of the comic relief with his little alien friend. So that's my short list. And you pointed out that this happens. And I think that it's really interesting to kind of be aware of this. What I want to do one day is an entire episode about characters that are overweight and their intelligence is questionable at the same time, because I want to talk about how that unconsciously influences us, especially for children, to believe a certain thing about a certain group of people. And so I think that could have harmful effects as well as just the way that like young American kids view Scottish people. And so be aware of that, guys, listeners, spuddies, whatever.
There's one more thing that made me think about there. I realized that Merry from Lord of the Rings is played by a Scottish actor as well, and is also the one that's always the comedy character.
Yes, he is. And true that they have like a big moment with him and whatever, and it's like heartfelt and whatever.
Oh,
but he is still comic relief, especially in the first movie. So thank you for adding to the list.
Most of the first two films, he's played as not just a comedy character. He is the source of comedy. Yep. He's clumsy and he's kind of he's headstrong, and he is the famous line about second breakfast is from him. Like all the stuff that happens that's meant to be silly and ridiculous comes from that character, and I don't think that's a coincidence.
Nope, I don't think so either. So they made a mockery of Scotland in the movie about Scotland. And then we have an archery contest. They're supposed to, so this is very interesting. They declare that there will be a contest to win the marriage to Merida. And then Merida gets to declare the contest, I guess. And she says archery because she's a really good archer, which I'm going to say this now and never again. This does not count as them paying off the Chekhov's bow and arrow. It doesn't count, okay? Because then when this is over...
If anything, this is the setup.
Yeah. When this is over, there's still 2/3 of the movie left, and the big bear villain shakes off her arrows like they're nothing. And it's completely useless. So no, they do not pay this off, and you're right. It's more of a setup. So anyway, she says archery. And my first question was, what if they were just good at archery? Like, she was trained in it. What made her think that they would not also, the three men, that they couldn't just do archery?
Because it's a Pixar film, we're meant to go into this assuming that because she feels that she's good at it, she must be the best.
Yeah.
That's just the nature of those films.
Yeah.
Right? So we're meant to feel like there is something distinctly special about her. It's a little bit of a common Disney thing where, because I think they never say it like this, and I don't think it's intentional, but they kind of unintentionally imply that because you are royalty, you're inherently better. And
and we have to talk a lot, but not today, about how Disney movies have always taken the side of royalty, which is actually really problematic to make people who are not royalty, e.g. little me, root for the ruling class that declares they deserve to be the ruling class because their blood is better, So anyway, I guess I just talked about it. Hooray!
So they rip off the scene from Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
I wrote that in my notes too. So they rip off the scene from Robin Hood, and she's really good at archery. And by the way, we can't even get into how the male characters are treated, because let's face it, they're also not treated well. There's a whole scene about how it's funny that one of the suitors looks like a big, strong, manly man, who, by the way, she's kind of into a little bit. You pointed out, but then he's not a big, strong, manly man, and like the gender normativity there is, but we don't have time.
Can we also just very quickly touch on the fact that one of the three suitors is implied to be in some way disabled, and that's kind of really not okay?
Mentally disabled, right?
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
I noticed that as well. And I don't even think he speaks a full sentence until the end of the movie. It's really not okay, and it's almost like our autism coding episode where he's coded as mentally challenged, but portrayed as stupid, if that makes sense. So they're essentially drawing a parallel between mental impairment and stupidity that they should not be doing for laughs again, Like that we are meant to laugh at this person, and it is not okay at all. I also noticed that, but I just didn't think we had time. But you know what? Whatever. This is a special. This is a special 2 episodes.
Didn't mean to turn it into a conversation there. We're just going to be like,
it's an important conversation to have. You know what? I don't feel like I don't know who needs to hear this, but you shouldn't be laughing at people who have mental and cognitive disabilities. Just full stop. So that needs to be over. But yeah, speaking of over, the archery contest is done. She won. And I remember the moment because I was rewatching this to take notes. And I was like, okay, the archery contest is done. So, let's see how much longer is in the movie. And we were 1/3 of the way into the movie. Mm-hmm. And you may think that means that the next episode is going to be even longer. It will probably be shorter, and you'll find out why. But yeah, so I literally jiggled the mouse and was like, okay, let's see where we are. And we were about 1/3 of the way through. So we had the setup of her not wanting to get married. We had the archery contest.
All of the plot is over.
All the plot's over. It's all done. She won. She won the archery contest. So she goes to yell at her mom, and I think we'll end here. She symbolically cuts this tapestry in her room, and it's all terrible. Oh no, this will be vaguely important later, but not really. And her mom is like, oh no, you cut that tapestry that's super important that I don't even know if it was set up earlier.
It wasn't. They have a couple of scenes with her like sewing.
Yeah.
But you never see what it is, and it's just sort of there, and no one ever draws attention to it, and it's never really seen as significant until this point. So we're supposed to be emotionally invested in the tearing of this tapestry. No idea what it is. And this is the thing. I think this is the first sign while watching it I had that the movie was really going to lose me, because what they put in place with that moment, with that scene, is that the moral lesson of this movie is that we should learn to respect, is that Merida needs to learn to respect the needs and views of her mother and her responsibilities, while her mother also learns to respect her better, and thus mending the bond between them, which is the phrase they actually use. Mend the bond torn by fate, I think, is the phrase they use. And that has nothing to do with what happened before it. It has nothing to do with what will happen later.
And this is essentially the end of movie 1. They go and have a big fight, and she cuts the tapestry. And
and then she storms off on her horse into the forest.
So roll credits. Yeah, but we have more. And so please come back next time, listeners. I'm going to start wrapping up now. So that's the end of part 1 of 2 of Brave. It's obviously ran a little long, but we did that with Finding Nemo too. Pixar apparently just kind of gives us so much fodder for episode length.
It really brings it out in you, yeah.
I'd like to thank you for coming to join us. Martyn, real quick, just tell everybody where they can find you on the internet. Plug yourself.
Well, a couple things. You can find me on Twitter at IsThisMartyn. That's ISTHISMARTYN. It's Martyn with a Y, so make sure you get that right. You can find me on Twitter there. I'm often like updating stuff and posting things. I'm also in a couple of other podcasts. One is The Haven, which is an actual play D&D podcast I do with a cast of 5 other people. And yeah, we have a lot of fun there. That's good work. We took a bit of a break over the holidays because of the pandemic and work-related issues, but we're getting back in the saddle now. I'm going to start recording again. We've got a couple of episodes also in the background that are in the works, so we'll be posting again some quite soon. We have 8 episodes, what we're calling Season 1 of The Haven, already out there, so check it out. Let me know what
I've listened to all of it. It's great.
Thank you. You can also thank Martyn Doherty, by the way, for all the great editing on that. He does a really good job. Mm-hmm. I'm also working on a new podcast called The Family Business, which I'm very excited about. I've already got our first episode recorded. It is a episode-by-episode watch of Supernatural, every single episode from beginning to end. And it was myself, my friend Martyn Doherty, and my friend Faith, and we are basically going through each episode and talking about the themes and the ideas and the real life history and lore that goes into each episode, and there's quite a lot there. And if you, for some reason, have ever been interested in Supernatural and either want to learn more or don't have the patience to watch it and want someone else to do it for you, we're there for that.
Oh, that sounds very exciting.
Yeah, it's fun. I'm looking forward to getting more done on that. And of course, the Indie Haven podcast, which is our indie video games podcast with Elodie and Josh. And we're very occasional recorders of that one, whenever we all get time, which is not often.
It's hard to schedule.
We do love it. It is, yeah. We talk about indie games, talk about video games news, and a lot of very weird comedy stuff on that, so that's really fun. You can find me on Instagram too, at Martyn Bryson, just all one word. Again, Martyn with a Y. So MartynBryson. Yeah, that's mostly my stuff.
And listeners, all of these things are going to be linked below in the description. And obviously, I'm probably going to be tweeting about it too. Speaking of me tweeting about it, let me do my plugs. You can find this podcast on Twitter at NotAgainPod. You can find me on Twitter for Potato Lady Podcast Reviews at Bexgoose. That's BEXGOOS. You can find us on Patreon, Ko-fi, and now you can buy me a potato. But it's the website's still Buy Me a Coffee, but you can buy me a potato. And that's just for me, my Potato Lady Podcast Reviews. All the relevant links are below, including our merch store. And yeah, please let us know what you think about Brave and, I don't know, whatever else. You can correct Martyn's history if you want, but remember to tweet at Martyn, not me. Until next time, friends, thank you so much for helping us to maintain our marbles for just one more week. We'll see you later. I'm Rebecca.
I'm anti-Alan.
You're anti-Alan.
Reverse Alan.
Reverse Alan. You're reverse Alan. And we'll see you later. Bye, friends.
Bye.